All right, so today we're looking at working with audio elements within JavaScript. So I've done videos previously about how you can add into your HTML an audio or a video element, and that's great. And you can add sources, and you can have the little player bar that shows up with the play and pause button, the seek bar, the volume, all those things. But I want to be able to add sound to the page without actually adding anything to the HTML. And so that's what we're going to be doing here. We're going to be building a media player, or a basic media player, that is going to allow us to load a track from a playlist, play it, pause it, jump to the next one, have it automatically move to the next one. We're going to display information like the current time, the total time, the name of the track that's playing. We'll have an indicator that says whether or not the audio is currently playing. And this is going to be my progress bar. So I'm going to start with a little dot in the middle, and it's going to grow to fill this circle. And I can click anywhere in the circle to change the percentage and seek to a different part in the track. And all this without putting anything into the HTML beyond what is already right here. So here's my HTML file for this. And you can see I've added my script, which we'll get to in a second. CSS, I've got my icon for a little music note. And here's the HTML. So there's a header, main, and here's what I'm going to use as my indicator for whether or not it's playing. I'm using a mark element, and I'm just going to put a little highlighting inside there. I've got it styled with my CSS to make it look like a little circle, like a little input radio button. And so it's going to glow green if the audio is currently playing. Then I've got a paragraph with my 4 buttons, a series of paragraphs with the information, and then here's my progress bar. Simply 2 divs, one with the class progress, one with the class bar. The one on the inside is the one that's going to grow and shrink depending on how far we are through the track. All right, the CSS, which is already done. And if you're looking for a copy of the finished code, you'll find a link in the description to the code gist, or rather to the repo, the repository that has all this code, the HTML, the CSS, and the finished JavaScript. You won't find the audio files inside there. I leave that to you to create your own folder. So I'm using a folder called Media, where I've added 3 MP3 files. So you can add your own MP3 files and then edit the JavaScript with the names of these. And I'll show you where to do that in just a moment. So in my CSS, some basic stuff. Here's the styling for that mark element, the thing where we're going to say, hey, are we or are we not currently playing? So I'm changing it from having a transparent background with a gray border to a green border with a green background. You could add other effects here as well if you want to add a box shadow, things like that. But that's what I'm going to keep it at for now. And then we have styling for the progress. So here's the progress circle. It's got height and width and border radius. And then we've got height and width on the bar set to 1 pixel to start. Same 50% for the border radius. And I've also got a transition on changing the width and height. So it will scale smoothly up and down. Okay, so we have the HTML with just plain HTML, no audio element, CSS styling all of this. Now let's jump into the JavaScript. Okay, here is our object. We have everything wrapped inside of one namespace object here, and we're calling the init method when the page loads. We have an audio element created here. So this is the object that's going to be responsible for playing all the music, for seeking through the tracks, for jumping to the next one. All the work is going to be done by this. This is going to be displaying, or not displaying, but playing all the audio. We only need one object to do it all. When we switch from one track to the next, we're just going to be changing the source on this. So this is kind of like an HTML audio element, but it's just in memory. So it's just in the JavaScript. We don't even have to append it to the page for this to work. My array of tracks. So these are the names inside my media folder of these individual files. I'm not including the folder name here. When I load them, I'll add the folder name. But for right now, it's just the file names. Current track is another global property that we've got inside of here. Current track refers to which one of these elements in my array is the one that's currently playing. So we keep track of whether I'm playing track 0, track 1, or track 2 as we move through here. My init function, the one that runs when the page first loads. So add DOM listeners, add audio listeners. So I'm in here, the add DOM listener function. This is where I'm going to add the click listeners for all my buttons and my click on the progress bar so I can jump to new things. And also another one, which I'll come back and talk about, is the visibility change. So this is when you're in here, if you were to click away from the page, it's kind of like you've blurred this page. That's the visibility change event. When I leave the page, I'm going to add the functionality to say that, hey, if I leave the page, I want to pause the audio where it is. And then when I come back to it, I want to resume playing. So we're going to add that functionality in here as well. Okay, the audio listeners. This is kind of a list of some of the most common. It's not an exhaustive list. There are more. And this link right here to the audio element, you'll find inside the description as well. Inside of here, there's lots of things about the audio element. And also, there's another link to a list of all of the events that we can use. All right, so this is the list that I'm going to use. The error event means I was not able to load the track. Ended means I reached the end, or the audio element has reached the end of the current track. There's nothing more that it can play. So it lets us know it's done. It's played everything that was part of that track. Do we want to do something? Well, this is going to be our trigger to move from one track to the next. So we'll do that. Load start. If for some reason you need to know if it's a really big file or something, you want to know when the load has started. Load metadata. So loaded metadata, means that you have all the metadata information. So whatever meta information was included in the header for the MP3 file, you now have access to that. Can play means enough of the MP3 file has been loaded that it can start to play. There's enough buffered ahead so it can start playing while it continues to load the rest of the track. Duration change. This is when you have enough information so that it knows the size of the file and it knows how much that it has to load, and it's been able to determine, okay, this track, this audio file, this MP3 file is 3 minutes and 40 seconds long. So at that point, this will be triggered. It'll say, okay, I know how big the file is so that we can display that information if you want. So there's a duration property that we will look at. Time update. As the audio element is playing the track, as it's moving through there, every time the time changes, so it's at 1.5 seconds, 1.8 seconds, 2.1 seconds, and so on. As it moves through the track, it will continuously call this time update event or fire the time update event so you can find out, hey, what is the current time in the track? At what position am I in the track? Play and pause. These are methods. There's a method called play and a method called pause that let you start and stop the audio, but they're also events to let you know that, hey, it has successfully started to play. It has successfully been paused. So you can listen for those events as well. All right, so I have in my listeners here, there's a start play and a pause play. Those are functions for my button clicks. And the play and pause functions are ones that just tell me, hey, it started to play or it has paused. Load. This is going to be our first thing that we do. When the user clicks on the load button, this is when I want to say, okay, I've clicked on the load button. I want to get whatever the current number track is within my array. I want to take that one and I want to set the source for the audio element to that track. So app.tracks, that's the array. App.currentTrack is 0. And app.audio, that's our audio object. So those are the things that we need down here in the load. What we're going to do is we're going to say app.audio That's the audio element. And we're going to set its source. So we've got app.tracks is the array. And inside there, app.currentTrack. All right, so this, right now as it stands, this gives me the name of the audio track. But we are going to be looking inside of a media folder, or we need to look inside the media folder. So I'm going to put backtick characters around this whole thing so I can embed that variable. And then I can also add in front of it the fact that, okay, wherever the HTML file is, from that location, from that relative location, I need to go into the media folder, and then inside the media folder, here's the audio that I want to load. So once we have that, we have actually successfully loaded that. So let's put a message in the console about that. And we may as well put the actual name of it, audio.source, so we get to see that showing up. So we'll start with that. And I'll open up the console so we can take a look at the console. Okay, so clicking on load. There we go. So audio has been loaded. That was the only code that we wrote. I have console log messages in a lot of these other events. So load starting. As soon as I change the source, that triggers the loading of the actual MP3 file into the audio element. So that was triggered. Duration change. After this happened, it said, hey, okay, I know how long the audio file is now. So I have that information. I can give you that if you want. Then the metadata. Okay, we now have the metadata. That's been loaded. And then the load start event fired saying it now has enough buffered, enough loaded of the audio that it can actually start to play. So all of this was triggered by us loading it. And all we did was this. Now I have this parameter here in my function called andPlay. It's got a default value of false, because later on what I want to do is, if I load a new track, I might want to automatically trigger it. Right now, for our purposes for this, I'm going to treat loading and playing as two separate things. So I've got the load happening, and I'm going to say, you know what, and play. So that could be true or false. By default, it's going to be false. But if it is true, then what I want to do is I'm going to, I want to make sure that, sorry, just scroll back up here. We've got this click event right here. So when I click on the button to load a track, this click event created by this is going to be passed in here. So this variable could be containing an event. I've got a default value of false if nothing gets passed in here, but so if I call this load function from someplace else in my code and I don't pass anything in, this variable will contain false. If this is called by clicking, it means that I've got an event object being passed in. So I'm going to check for that. I'm going to say, okay, if we clicked on the button, and play is not an instance of event. So I'm checking this thing. Okay, does the thing exist? If it does, and it's not an event object, we already know that this thing was true, or truthy. So if I pass in a true value or it was an event, in either of those cases, this test will pass. Then, if it does exist, I'm going to make sure that the thing is not an event. And if it's not an event and it was truthy, it means that I called this function and I passed in some true value. So we're going to be doing that a little bit later. When we get to the end of the track and we want to start loading and playing the next one, that's what we're going to do right here. So app.startPlay. I'm going to call the startPlay function. If I call the load function and I pass in the value true, a Boolean that is true, then it will automatically start to play. All right, so we may as well move on to the start function now, because we know that the load works. we saw that all the messages about all those events, and that's just down here, all these messages that I've got just as placeholders. Console logs through all these. So I've loaded it. Now I want to start to play, and the first time I click on play, I want it to actually start the track playing. So we've loaded it. So we need to check and make sure that there is actually something loaded first. So let's do that. Let's say if app.audio source means there is something loaded. So we will do app.audio.play. And this is the built-in method that I was talking about before. So there is an event called play, but there's also a method. This is the thing that actually starts it playing. So if we don't have an audio source, let's just write something in the console.warn. So I'll test that. So page refreshed, there's nothing loaded. If I click on the play button, there's our warn message. Okay, so that works. Before I do play, I'm going to add the pause as well, so I can pause the audio once it starts. And it's much the same. If app.audio, I'm just going to check to see if there is an audio object that exists. If there is, then app.audio.pause. Now, there shouldn't be any situation with this code where app.audio doesn't exist, but just to demonstrate again this logical short-circuiting using the AND operator. All right, so now I can play, and I can pause as long as something is loaded. So the pause, nothing happens, there's nothing loaded. Play, need to load a track first, so click on load. Now I have something loaded. I click on this. There we go, there's our audio, and pause. Perfect. So play and pause are both functioning now with just those couple lines of code. And the time update event is also firing. So there was 18 updates in just that little bit of audio that we were playing there. There was 18 updates to the time update. All right, so we'll scroll down here to the time. So we have duration change. Here we go. So duration change, that was fired up here when we loaded it. The load started, and then we got the duration change. This is going to give us how much time, and we're going to write it out here, the total time. I'm going to do that. We'll write out the track name as well. And current time, we'll update that one because this is getting a whole bunch of updates. So we're going to write those three values out. So inside duration change, I want to update in the HTML. So there's a span with the ID total, or a time element with the ID total. I'm going to do that. The span with the ID title, that's going to be the track name. And then the current time with the ID current. So total, title, and current. Those are the three that we're going to update. So we'll say document. That's the duration. And that's the name of the song. So let's test those two. When we load, there we go, we get Carry On Wayward Son. That's the name of the audio. And this is the total time of the track in seconds. If you want to display it as time, then you can convert the seconds into a display that has minutes, seconds, hours, and so on. Current time, same idea. We've got the event up here. So we did duration change. Now we want time update. That's the next event to call our time update. Here. And this one was the current one. And again, we're just going to display the one property that's going to give us the total number of seconds, and that is called current time. This is going to give us the same sort of thing as here. It's just a number of seconds, a decimal value with the number of seconds. Oh, we're also doing this here. The audio is playing. So when I play, pause, I already had that in the code here. And that had to do with the events for play and pause. So I had already put those ones in there. All I'm doing when I play and pause, so this isn't the click, this is the play event, the pause event that the audio element is giving us. So when that happens, I'm adding this CSS class to the body element, or I'm removing it from the body element. If we jump in here, if we look in the elements, here's the body. There is no class currently. When I hit play, let's see, it adds that. When I pause, it removes it. The reason I do that is in the CSS, this is my trigger for updating it. So my mark is this little gray circle right here. If mark is inside of something that has this class name, which is the body element, then this is the style that gets applied, and this one overrides this one. It's got greater specificity, so this is the one that wins out. So we play, the body gets the class name, and it does this. All right. So we've made a lot of progress here. We've got a lot of things working. We've got the duration, we've got the time update, we've got the song title, the play and pause is working. Next, that's our next one that we want to do. So up here, we have our next event when we click on the button. And I have part of the code written for that one just to save a little bit of time. This is all we're doing here. We're taking that value, that integer for current track, and we're adding one. We're incrementing the number by 1. So it moves to the next element in the array, or it's pointing to, can be used to point to the next element in the array. But if I get to the end of my array and you just increment, then eventually you're going to get to numbers that aren't in the array. You're going to exceed the length of the array. So we're going to check it. If the current track is equal to or greater than the length of the array, set it back to 0. So this is looping back to the first element in the array. So if I get to the very end, I want to do that. Now here, I'm going to call that load function, the one that we did up here. This one. Now I haven't added the and play in there, but I now can click the next button, it'll change the number, and then it loads the next track. So here's this one loaded. And when I click next, there, current time and the new track. Load the next track. And then it jumps back to the beginning. And so it's just going to continue to loop through them like that. Now there could be audio playing at the same time, so you could argue that it's a good practice to stop it playing, and you can say, okay, I'm going to do this as well. When I'm going to change the track, I want to pause it. Just so there's no audio playing, there's no overlap. There's nothing playing right now, and now I'm going to load the next one. And if I load the next one by clicking on the button, why not make it play as well? So I'm going to pass in a Boolean that's true. And if I do that here, I can load the first one, I play it, I click next, and then this one automatically plays. I click next, this one automatically plays. Okay, so we've got play, pause next, and let's go back and do this visibility change, because this is going to do pretty much the same sort of thing as we were doing before with the clicking on the pause button. Visibility changes means your page is in the background. The browser understands which is the current tab. And when you switch tabs, this one goes into the background, so its visibility state property changes on the document object. So it's either going to be visible or I think hidden is the other value, but we're checking for visible. If it is visible, I'm entering the page, and that means that I want to start playing. So we'll say if app.wasPlaying, because we're going to create this property. When I leave the page, I want to set app.wasPlaying to a value that tells me whether or not it's playing. Now I can go into the HTML, I can look at the body, find out if it's got a class, and look to see if it is playing. But you know what? The audio element has a property called paused that tells me if the audio is not currently playing. So app.audio.paused, not played, but paused, that is going to be true if the audio is paused. I want the reverse of that. If it's paused, I want to say no, and if it's not paused, that means it was playing, so I want to set this as true. So I do that. We'll say, hey, yes, it's paused, and I'm actually going to do the pause. Now, if the person closes the tab, all this is gone, and it's not going to matter because we're going to be back to the beginning of the whole thing. But if the tab is still loaded, if all this JavaScript is still in memory, we're going to have the value for this variable. I don't need to put it in local storage or anything because the page is still in memory. The page is still loaded in the browser. So I will have this variable, and if app was playing was set to true at some point, then we're going to say app.startPlay. There we go. So we load a track, we play a track, it's playing, I leave, and the audio has paused, and you can see the little audio thing here. Now it's back, we're back on here. When I leave, this will fade away. There we go, there is no longer audio coming from that track, but if I go back, the audio resumes. So you can watch the current time. I'm at 12 seconds, 13, 14, I leave, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. If the audio was still playing, we'd be up to like 24 seconds now. We're still back at 15, 16. All right, so we have the leaving and coming back. We've got play, we've got paused, we've got load next. We haven't implemented the, hey, when you get to the end of the track yet. We can do that, we just can't test it yet without waiting for the entire track. But I will go back down and implement the code because it's quite simple. When we get to the end, when we've actually ended the track, all we need to do is code that we've already done, code that we've already written. There we go, app.next. That was our click right here. We paused, incremented, checked that we were not at the end. If we were, go back to the beginning, and then load. With true to make it play. This is it. We've already written the functionality, so we're just going to reuse our function. So the goal of writing your functions in JavaScript should always be to try and keep them small and reusable. And here, we've already written a code to do a function to do something. I just have to call it here. One line of code, and I've already got it working. So we're meeting our goals by doing that. Now, seeking and updating the progress bar. That's the last part for our code right here. So time update. We've got that one working. We are updating the current time here. We just want to update this display as well. So let's do that. Time update. Down here we are. So we're updating what's written inside. There's the current time. And now I've got another function here, show %. This is going to be what I use to update the display for the progress bar. So we're just going to call it. Every time there's a time update, I'm going to do this. I'm going to call my show %, which is going to update my progress bar. The percentage itself, how far you are through the track, is really just the current time property that we're already using divided by the duration, which we already know about. So this gives us a percentage. Now, my progress bar right here, I have a square with a square inside of it. And then I've used CSS to round it off. I'm using CSS to round this one off as well. I want to grow this circle. I'm using CSS to keep it centered, but I want to grow it, make the center circle get bigger and bigger and bigger and slowly fill this. So if I'm 18 seconds into something that's 323 seconds, it's going to say, oh, okay, hey, you're like 2% in, so this should be 2% of its radius should be 2% of this radius. So from this center point to here. So what do we need to do? We need to calculate how big the radius is. We need to calculate where the person is clicking if we want them to seek. And to resize this as it plays, well, if I just calculate that percentage, if it's 2%, I calculate what's 2% of this radius, double it, and then that becomes how big this inner circle is. So let's do that. We're going to update the percentage display right here. So this part right here, this percentage played. And if I remember correctly, it was called percent played. So document get element by ID, PCT play, set its text content to be, and I want to put a percent sign in there. And then a little expression. I will take this percent and I need to get a text version of that. So I've got to take the percent, which is going to be a decimal number, multiply it by 100, and then I'm going to truncate how many decimal places. So I'm going to create a new variable since there's several things to do there. PCT text. We're going to take the percent, multiply it by 100. And then that value, we're going to, let's do 2 decimal places, 2 fixed 2. So we have a string here. We're going to take this decimal number, multiply by 100, and then round it off at 2 decimal places. That's what we're going to display right here. And then I'm going to calculate the size of the inner circle based on the numeric percent right here. So I need to know how wide the progress bar itself is. So we'll say, let's do it as a integer percent, query selector, progress, that is the outer div. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to get its client width. That is the size of this outer box, the gray one. So from here to here, how big is that? That's my width. And then the bar that's inside, that's the dot bar that is inside of dot progress. And we're going to set its style dot width property. There we go. That is going to be equal to, and this we need to do like this because in CSS we have to put the px there. So we're going to take the percentage that we calculated multiplied by the width of the outer box. Now I've only done the width, so when we play, we're just stretching this up. We got to load a track. We want to have a circle, so we need to repeat this for the height as well. We want to expand in both directions. So we'll load a big circle. And with every track that plays, it grows and grows and grows. Okay, so that is the growing of that. And our last step is the seek. So I want to be able to click somewhere inside of here. Now we're going to go back and use high school math. So you want to get the length of the hypotenuse, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. We're going to do that. I need to know the x and y coordinates on the screen of this center point. I need to know the x and y coordinates of where the person clicks. And then basically that's going to be my triangle. And I'm going to have a delta x and a delta y. I figure out the distance vertically and the distance horizontally, and it could be in any of the 4 directions, over here, over here, over here, over here. So I have to figure out where the person clicked, what the difference is, and then figure out the length of the hypotenuse, and then if the person clicked here, let's say, this distance as a percentage of the radius of this whole thing, which is half the diameter of the square. Half the width of the square gives us the radius, and the clicking point, hypotenuse, as a percentage of that. That gives me a percentage that I can then say, hey, you know what? That current time value that we were displaying here, I'm going to change that to duration times the percentage that I just figured out with the click. So that was the explanation, and I've already written the code to save a bit of time here. Here is the X and Y coordinates when you click. So this is the click event within the progress, the outer progress, the gray circle. Where did you click on that? So this gives me the X and Y coordinates on the screen. The center of the circle, I'm going to get the progress bar, and I'm going to get its offset left and top. That tells me where the top left corner of this thing. So right up here, this is the top left corner of that box. From that, I have to add and add to get down to this point. So we're adding the radius. And the radius is, hey, that big gray box, the big gray circle, get its width and divide it by 2. That gives us the radius of the circle. So the whole width of this box cut in half gives us the radius. So we've got radius, we've got the center, X and Y coordinates for both the containing progress div and also the bar div that's the one inside. We calculate the distance from the center to the X and Y coordinates that we clicked on here. So from here to here, what is the distance? And I'm using math absolute, so I don't care if it's a positive or a negative number. Like, I don't want to have to figure out which is bigger and then subtract the bigger from the smaller. I just do math absolute. What's the difference between the two numbers? Then we take a square. So this is a squared plus b squared. And take the square root of that. That gives us the length of the hypotenuse. You divide the hypotenuse by the radius, and that is your percentage. So with the percentage, we just have to apply that to the length of the track. So we're going to have percentage times the duration, and app.audio.current time is going to be this new value. So it is our percentage that we just calculated times app.audio.duration. So a percentage of the total time of the track gives us our current time. This changes where we are in the song. So changing the current time value jumps to a new part of the track. Once you've done that, then it's going to trigger the time update. And the time update, because we've done this in little tiny functions, the time update function, which is being triggered by us changing the current time value, will update this, and then the show percentage is going to update the display, what we just did. So let's save this, come back, we'll load the track. So it's going along here. You can see that this is growing. Now if I click someplace else, go to the next one, it's back to the beginning. And each time I click, it's jumping to that new point. So we now have a seek function. We've got a progress bar that's being updated. We're displaying all the information for the user, maybe not formatted the way we want, but it's working. And that's it. That is all the code that you need to build an audio player. Now, I don't have anything about displaying the playlist, but I mean, that's just basic DOM manipulation. We have an array of information for the audio tracks that we want to load. All right, so that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. I answer as many as I have time for. And as always, thanks for watching.